In the mid-1980s, a power struggle between Italian-American organized crime families and Colombian cartels turned deadly. Multiple cartel operatives disappeared after attempting to negotiate territory in New York. The FBI documented the pattern, but bodies, they were never found. This is the untold story of how the American mafia defended their turf, and why 13 is a number that still haunts federal investigators today. Let's set the scene. It's 1986. The Medellín Cartel is at its peak. According to DEA estimates, they're controlling 80% of the cocaine flowing into the United States. We're talking billions, with a B, in annual revenue. To put that in perspective, the cartel was making so much money that they were reportedly spending $10,000 a month just on rubber bands to wrap cash. They had to write off 10% of their yearly profits as loss to rats, because literal rodents were eating through stacks of bills stored in warehouses. This wasn't just a drug operation. This was an empire that rivaled legitimate corporations. Pablo Escobar was offering to pay off Colombia's entire national debt, nearly $10 billion, in exchange for amnesty. That's the kind of money we're talking about. But here's the problem: New York City. The 5 Italian-American crime families, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno, they've controlled New York for decades. We're not just talking about restaurants and construction rackets here. These families had their hands in everything: the Fulton Fish Market, the Garment District, JFK Airport, the Javits Center, unions representing longshoremen, teamsters, and construction workers. Every major port on the eastern seaboard had mob influence. And most importantly for this story, they controlled drug distribution networks that had been established since the French Connection days of the 1960s and 70s. When Colombian cartels started making billions off cocaine in the early 1980s, they realized something crucial. Miami was great for importing the product, but New York was where the real money was made. Wall Street traders, entertainment industry, fashion world. These weren't your typical drug users. These were people with serious money to spend. So the cartels made a decision. They wanted to cut out the middlemen and operate directly in New York. The mafia's response was simple: absolutely not. When Colombian cartels tried to bypass the Italians and set up their own operations in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, let's just say negotiations didn't go well. According to federal court documents from the 1990s RICO trials, there were at least 7 documented instances between 1984 and 1987 where cartel representatives entered meetings with mafia figures and simply vanished. No arrests, no bodies, just gone. The FBI's Organized Crime Task Force knew something was happening. Wiretaps caught references to meetings. Informants whispered about sit-downs gone wrong, but concrete evidence almost impossible to find. Why? Because the mafia had been perfecting the art of making problems disappear for nearly a century. This wasn't amateur hour. These were organizations that had survived prohibition, the Appalachian meeting raids, the Valachi hearings, decades of FBI surveillance, and multiple waves of prosecutions. They knew how to operate in the shadows. One case in particular stood out. Spring of 1986. Federal agents tracked a group of cartel operatives, estimated between 10 and 15 individuals, traveling from Miami to New York for what was described in intercepted communications as a business negotiation. The FBI had been monitoring both organizations for months. They knew tensions were rising. They knew the cartels were getting frustrated with having to pay tribute to the Italian families for every kilogram moved through New York. And they knew the mafia was getting nervous about the cartel's growing power and willingness to use extreme violence. The surveillance team documented everything: flight records, hotel check-ins, rental cars, phone calls from payphones. The cartel operatives weren't being subtle, they were confident, maybe too confident. They were never seen again. If you're already hooked, smash that subscribe button, because this story goes deeper than you think. Here's what made the Italian mafia so effective: patience and discipline. Let me explain the fundamental difference between how these two organizations operated. because it's crucial to understanding what happened. Cartels in the 1980s operated with shock and awe, public executions, beheadings left in town squares, car bombs, assassinating judges, journalists, and politicians in broad daylight. The message was always the same: we are untouchable, and if you cross us, everyone will know what happens. In Colombia, this strategy worked. The government was overwhelmed, the public was terrified, and the cartels operated with near impunity for years. But the mafia, they believed in silence. The old Sicilian saying was "Ku I grave surdu orbu I tasai, campa centeni, en passai." He who is deaf, blind, and silent will live 100 years in peace. The mafia didn't want attention. They wanted to blend in, to operate legitimate businesses, to have judges and politicians in their pockets, not in their crosshairs. Former FBI agent Joseph Pistone, you might know him as Donnie Brasco, spent 6 years undercover in the Bonanno crime family from 1976 to 1981. In his debriefings and subsequent testimony, he described how the mafia handled threats. They don't react emotionally. They plan, they wait, and when they move, it's surgical. You might not even realize you're a target until it's too late. And once it happens, there's no evidence, no witnesses, no body. You just disappear. Pistone also described something else crucial: the mafia's organizational structure. Unlike the cartels, which operated more like military hierarchies, the mafia families were compartmentalized. Each crew operated semi-independently. Information was shared on a need-to-know basis. This made them incredibly difficult to infiltrate or dismantle, because taking out one piece didn't collapse the whole organization. When cartel operatives arrived in New York in 1986 demanding territory, the mafia's response wasn't immediate violence. It was strategic manipulation. According to testimony from multiple turncoat mobsters in the 1990s, guys like Sammy, the Bull, Gravano, Philip Leonetti, and Michael Franzese, here's how it worked. Step 1, agree to the meeting. Be cordial, professional. Make them feel like you're willing to negotiate. Use phrases like "we can work something out" and "there's enough money for everyone." The goal is to make them lower their guard. Step 2, choose the location carefully. Somewhere controlled, isolated, no witnesses, usually an industrial area, near water if possible, somewhere with multiple exits that you control. The meeting location is never neutral ground. That's a myth. It's always your territory. Step 3, stack the deck. They might bring 12 guys, you bring 40, but they don't see the other 38 until it's too late. Hidden in back rooms, in vehicles outside, on rooftops. By the time they realize what's happening, there's no way out. Step 4, make the problem disappear. Completely. And this is where the mafia's decades of experience became crucial. Court records from the Gambino family RICO case revealed that the family had connections to waste management companies, construction sites, cement companies, and even fishing operations. Translation: lots of ways to dispose of evidence. One informant testified about a phrase used within the family: taking someone for a ride. It didn't mean a car trip. It meant you weren't coming back. Another phrase: he's been given a pass. That didn't mean forgiveness. It meant the person had been killed and the body would never be found. The waste management connections were particularly useful. In the 1980s, before modern tracking systems and environmental regulations, garbage trucks could pick up anything, take it anywhere, and dump it in landfills with no questions asked. Some informants claimed that bodies were compacted with regular trash and buried under tons of garbage in New Jersey landfills. Good luck finding evidence there. The construction connections, even more sinister. Buildings were going up all over New York in the 1980s. Foundations were being poured constantly. And once concrete sets with something, or someone, inside it, that's permanent. There are rumors, never confirmed, that bodies from mob hits in the 80s are literally part of buildings still standing in Manhattan today. The waters off Brooklyn, the landfills in New Jersey, construction foundations being poured in Manhattan. Federal investigators suspected all of them became burial grounds. But suspicion isn't evidence, and that's exactly how the mafia designed it. Back to that spring 1986 case. FBI surveillance teams tracked the cartel group to Brooklyn. Agents documented their arrival at a warehouse district near the waterfront, an area that was largely industrial, sparsely populated, and had very few security cameras at that time. This wasn't accidental. The location was chosen precisely because it minimized the risk of outside witnesses. The surveillance team set up positions around the area. They had visual confirmation of the cartel operatives entering the warehouse. They had audio equipment, though the signal was spotty. Then, static, communications went dark. The agents assumed it was equipment malfunction or interference from the metal building structures. But in hindsight, some investigators believe the Mafia may have used signal jammers, technology that was becoming more accessible in the mid-'80s. When agents moved in hours later, the warehouse was empty. No signs of struggle, no forensic evidence, nothing. The cleanup was professional, military grade. Agents found that the warehouse floor had been recently washed. They could still smell industrial cleaning chemicals. Any trace evidence that might have existed was gone. No blood, no shell casings if weapons were fired, no personal belongings. The few security cameras in the area had mysteriously malfunctioned that evening. Convenient. One detail bothered investigators: the timeline. From the last confirmed sighting to the FBI's arrival was less than 3 hours. That's an incredibly tight window to remove 10-15 people and sanitize an entire crime scene. Unless you'd done it before. Former prosecutor Edward McDonald, who led multiple mafia prosecutions in the 1980s and was depicted in the movie Goodfellas, said in a 1998 interview. These organizations had crews specifically for this. Cleanup teams, body disposal experts. They treated it like a business operation because that's what it was. They had it down to a science. Vehicles pre-positioned. Cleaning supplies ready, disposal sites already identified. They could clear a scene faster than you'd believe possible. McDonald also noted something chilling. The Mafia had learned from decades of mistakes. In the old days, they'd sometimes leave evidence. A weapon, a witness, a body that washed up. But by the 1980s, they'd refined their methods. The disappearances were so complete that prosecutors couldn't even prove a crime had occurred, let alone who committed it. Drop a comment below. Do you think any evidence still exists? The answer might surprise you. Here's what happened next. The Colombian cartels didn't take it lying down. These were not organizations that accepted defeat quietly. Federal wiretaps from late 1986 captured cartel leaders discussing retaliation. The conversations were coded, but the intent was clear. Hit teams were reportedly sent to New York. Bounties were offered. Some sources claim as high as $1 million per target. The cartels wanted blood. They sent some of their most experienced sicarios, contract killers who'd carried out dozens of assassinations in Colombia. These weren't amateurs. These were trained operatives who'd eliminated police chiefs, rival cartel members, and political figures. But here's the thing, the targets were ghosts. The Mafia's compartmentalized structure meant that even if you took out one person, 10 others could step in. And they all had lawyers, alibis, and legitimate business fronts. The made men, formal members of the families, were insulated by layers of associates and soldiers who did the actual dirty work. More importantly, the Mafia had home field advantage. They'd controlled New York for 70 years. They knew every neighborhood, every cop on the beat, every politician who owed them favors. When cartel hit teams arrived in New York, the Mafia knew about it before they'd even checked into their hotels. Several of the cartel hit men simply disappeared themselves. Others were arrested on unrelated charges, weapons possession, immigration violations, and deported before they could act. The message was clear: you're in our house now and you're not going to win. The conflict escalated for several months. There were suspected hits on both sides. A few bodies did turn up, cartel associates found in car trunks, Mafia associates shot outside restaurants. But the high-level operatives on both sides remained untouchable. Eventually, the cartels made a pragmatic decision. Fighting the mafia on their home turf was a losing game. It was expensive, it was risky, and it was drawing federal attention that neither organization wanted. Instead, they found other partners, biker gangs like the Hells Angels, who had their own distribution networks. Russian organized crime groups, who were just starting to establish themselves in New York in the late 80s. Dominican crews in Washington Heights, anyone but the Italians. By 1987, an uneasy truce had formed. The cartels would sell to the mafia at wholesale prices, and the mafia would handle distribution in New York. Nobody was happy, but everyone made money. And most importantly, the violence stopped drawing federal heat. As for those missing cartel operatives, to this day, not one body from that 1986 incident has been recovered. The FBI officially classified the case as suspected homicides, insufficient evidence to prosecute. But former agents who worked the case, they know what happened, they just can't prove it. In a 2019 podcast interview, a retired federal investigator who requested anonymity said, "We knew, we just couldn't prove it. And honestly, some cases are designed never to be proven. These guys were professionals. They'd been doing this since the 1930s. They knew every forensic technique we had. They knew how to make evidence disappear, and they had the resources to do it right." The investigator continued, "The thing that bothered me most wasn't that we couldn't solve it. It was how routine it seemed for them. This wasn't some desperate, sloppy operation. This was just business as usual, and that tells you something about how many times they'd done it before." The warehouse still exists. It's been renovated multiple times over the years. Different businesses have occupied it, everything from an auto parts warehouse to a textile distributor to, ironically, a storage facility. But locals who have worked there for years sometimes report oddities. Cold spots in certain areas, even in summer. Tools and equipment going missing, only to reappear in different locations. Strange sounds at night when the building should be empty, voices, footsteps, the sound of vehicles that aren't there. One construction worker interviewed in 2015 during a renovation project said he refused to work night shifts there anymore. "The energy's wrong," he said. "Something bad happened in that place. You can feel it. Some of the other guys felt it too, but nobody wanted to talk about it. We just wanted to finish the job and get out." Maybe he's more right than he knows. Another interesting detail: property records show the warehouse changed hands 3 times between 1986 and 1990, each time at below-market prices. Some local investigators believe this was the mafia selling off properties connected to criminal activity, distancing themselves from any potential future evidence. This story isn't just about crime, it's about power, territory, and the lengths organizations will go to protect what's theirs. The mafia cartel wars of the 1980s reshaped organized crime in America. They established boundaries, rules, and consequences for those who crossed them. The cartels learned that raw violence doesn't always win. Sometimes experience and institutional knowledge matter more. The mafia learned that they couldn't ignore the changing drug trade forever. Eventually, they'd have to adapt or be replaced. Both organizations were eventually brought down by federal prosecutions in the 1990s and 2000s. RICO statutes, witness cooperation agreements, and aggressive prosecution strategies did what violence never could. They dismantled the hierarchies. But the lessons from 1986 remained. In the underworld, respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes it's taken by force. 13 people, maybe more, learned that lesson the hardest way possible. They walked into that warehouse thinking they were negotiators. They were wrong. They were messages. And the message was received loud and clear across every cartel in South America. New York belongs to the mafia. If this opened your eyes to a hidden chapter of criminal history, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the underworld. Drop a comment. What other mafia mysteries should we investigate next? The Hoffa disappearance? The Lufthansa heist? The Commission trial? Let me know below. Until next time, The truth is out there. You just have to know where to look.